Welcome all to our channel GTech Fluent. Our today's topic number 11 in Angular video tutorial series is property binding into the Angular. So in this video, we will discuss and understand another one-way binding technique, that is property binding. So in this tutorial, we will cover what is meant by the property binding, how to use the property binding with an example, what are the content security provided by the Angular if you provided some malicious content, and what is difference between the property binding and interpolation. So let's start, and first we see what is meant by the property binding. So property binding is a one-way data binding technique. As we discussed in our previous video tutorial series, string interpolation or Angular interpolation is another way of the one-way data binding technique. So in property binding, we bind the property of DOM element to field which is defined into our component. The property binding in Angular application is used to bind the values of the component or the model property to the HTML element. So depending on the value, it changes the existing behavior of the particular HTML element. So actually, Angular internally converts string interpolation into the property binding. So we will discuss how that string interpolation is work with the same as a property binding and why we require the property binding separately if we can achieve the same thing with the string interpolation. So we are in our project which we have created for this video tutorial series. So in order to understand the property binding, how to use the property binding into the Angular application, let's open student details component, and we need to add one property here with the name of title. So let's add one property. We'll name it as a title. It's a type of string, and we'll assign the value welcome to GTech Fluent tutorials. Now we have added one property into our component. Let's open the student detail HTML page, student detail.component.html page, and here we'll add one title to show that property into our HTML page. So for that, we will add one h1 tag here. So let's understand the syntax of the property binding. So we need to define the property of the particular element into the square bracket and assign the property of component which we have declared the property into the our student details component. So in our case, the property for the HTML element is a inner HTML. So let's use that, and the property inside our component which we have created, that is title. Let's copy this and paste it here, and let's save. So now we are done with the simple text property binding here. So we are binding the property of h1 tag with the property of the component. So whatever value assigned with the component will be displayed as an inner HTML to the this h1 tag. So let's see the result into the browser. If you see, we are getting the welcome to the GTech Fluent tutorials. So we have the question like we can achieve same thing with the our string interpolation. Let's try that. Now if you see, we are using the title as a string interpolation as we have used for our previous tutorial series for this last name and the first name. Let's save it and see the result. Look, we are getting the same result in the both case. Now let's work with some Boolean data. So if you want to disable some button into our HTML page, so how to do that? So let's add one property here. We can say is enable Boolean and assign the default value false. Save it. Let's add the button into the our HTML page button. Now here we need to disable the button using property binding. So as we discussed, property binding, we need to assign the value for the property for the particular element. For the button, we need to define the element, which element we are going to be assigned, that is disable equal to and value must be into the single quote and the property. So property inside the component. Let's close this and give some name. Click here. Let's save and see the result. So this button is not clickable, it is disabled. So now let's see what is the difference between the string interpolation or angular interpolation and the property binding. So as we discussed, we can achieve the same thing using the property binding as we achieve using the angular interpolation. So in our previous video of interpolation, we have discussed how to implement or use the string interpolation or angular interpolation into our application. So now let's understand what is the difference between property binding and the angular interpolation. The angular interpolation and the property binding both flows the value from component to the view template, that is one-way binding or one direction technique. Now we may have one question, that is we can achieve the same thing using the both property binding and the angular interpolation. Then what is the difference between them and when to use over that? Interpolation in Angular is just an alternative approach for the property binding, a special type of the syntax that converts into the property binding. But there are some scenarios where we need to use string interpolation instead of property binding. For example, if you want to concat the string, then you need to use Angular interpolation instead of property binding. For example, in this example, we have the source, but our image name is coming from the component. So in this case, you can't use the property binding. So here you can use the string interpolation with the different parameters. So even you can add another parameter here into your path. So in this way, you can use string interpolation and property binding. So let's understand some security feature provided by the Angular when we work with the interpolation or the property binding. So let's switch to the VS Code and see the example. So for the security point of view, both Angular data binding and the Angular interpolation protect us for the malicious HTML content before rendering it onto the web browser. So now let's understand this with the example. So let's declare one property inside the student details component. We'll assign some value like hello and we'll add script tag here, and you can make it as a alert notification you are hacked. So now we have defined some text, and inside that we have provided the script which indicating some message like you are hacked. So now let's assign this into our HTML element. Let's go to the HTML page and let's copy this h1 tag and let's assign this property to that tag. So let's see the output. Now if you see in the output, we will get only hello world, not that script tag. It will not render into the browser. So now let's try this with the string interpolation. Let's go to the HTML page. Let's copy this HTML and let's assign this and let's save. Here it is rendering into the browser as it text. So this is the security feature which we get with the both. So you can use either string interpolation or the property binding both way. So there is a security feature provided by the Angular. So please take a note of this thing while implementing or using any string variable into your Angular application. This is the idea about the property binding and what are the ways and what are the feature we have provided by the Angular considering the property binding and the string interpolation. So please let us know if anyone has any query or doubt. We will meet in our next video. Thank you.